The Possession Files is a Red Treehouse exclusive series. You can listen wherever you stream podcasts. Simply search for either the Red Treehouse or the Possession Files, and be sure to follow, like, and subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. An important note: sources for this episode can be found in the show notes. The Red Treehouse is dedicated to my dad. I love you, Pop. If you've seen The Exorcist, you know there are 2 wars being fought at the same time in the movie. The most obvious is the battle between good and evil. Chris MacNeil, Father Karras, and Father Merrin are all fighting to save young Regan from the demon Pazuzu, who has her firmly in his grip. But there's a second war being waged: religion versus science. We see and hear Chris's frustration when the doctors come up empty in their attempts to diagnose and treat Regan, and no series of tests, diagnostics, or medication provides relief. And when Chris turns to the church for help, Father Karras initially tries to dissuade her, and even after seeing the demon-possessed Regan for himself, he remains skeptical, at least at first. In fact, the only one with any measure of confidence is Father Merrin, who is wholly convinced Regan is fighting something demonic. As Anneliese Michel's story progresses, the tension between religion and science, or maybe more specifically, faith and reason, will become more complex. We can already sense the tension as Anneliese's family tries desperately to find solutions for her struggles. But with her doctors unable to find a cause for her blackouts and paralysis episodes, Anneliese becomes more convinced that her afflictions are more spiritual than medical. And as the medical symptoms and questions pile up, Anneliese begins showing signs that something much darker may be occurring. And it leaves us to wrestle with a series of difficult questions. Should faith and reason be archenemies, or is there a way for them to coexist? Does religious conviction require a person to cast aside rational thought? And perhaps one of the most interesting questions of all, and I'll say up front that it's a sensitive one: is it possible that what was once understood as demonic possession may actually be a form of mental illness? In this episode of The Possession Files, we're going to explore the symptoms and signs of Anneliese's struggle, and hopefully gain a better grasp of the medical symptoms, and because Anneliese was convinced her troubles were spiritual, the signs of demonic possession. I'm your host, Will, and together let's explore The Possession Files, the trials of Anneliese Michel. Anneliese's transition home from the hospital was anything but smooth. And in fact, anxiety had settled in, as she was 2 years behind her peers in school after starting late and losing a year because of illness. As is often the case for new students, Anneliese was worried about fitting in, and though her friend Maria was still at school, albeit a year above her, she feared not knowing anyone in her current grade. But there was something else. Anneliese trusted Maria. Remember, she was there when Anneliese had her first blackout episode, and she longed to have someone to confide in. The strange, powerful sensation, which she described as, quote, sweetness she had never known before, end quote, and the other part that evoked fear and dread, the demonic faces that haunted her since Middleburg. Upon seeing Maria for the first time, Anneliese was elated. At first. They embraced, caught up on Anneliese's stay in the hospital, school, boys, all the topics you'd expect to cover in high school. But Anneliese's excitement quickly turned to disappointment as she found no opening to talk with Maria about her spiritual experiences. It's important to note that Anneliese's classmates noticed a significant shift in her personality and disposition upon returning to school. Maria is reported as saying, quote, "After her illness, Anneliese was changed. She was quiet and withdrew from her friends. I also noticed that she kept wanting to carry on mostly religious conversations." End quote. Other classmates commented, quote, "She was quiet and serious, a loner if not an outsider, introverted and dreamy, who participated in silliness or pranks only if we drew her in. I recognized that she was deeply religious and also lived accordingly." End quote. Academically, Anneliese achieved average grades, which was a stark contrast to her previous academic performance. A month after returning home from the hospital, Anneliese was taken for a follow-up visit to a clinic in Miltenberg, where she met with Dr. Reichelt. While asking about Anneliese's progress, Anna informed him that she'd had another seizure recently, and that it coincided with the start of the school year. Anneliese was less than thrilled with having another doctor appointment, and complained about being poked and prodded and shuttled back and forth. Her checkup revealed that her lungs were fine, but there were questions about her circulation, and Anneliese was referred to a specialist, Dr. Packhauser. Something interesting. Dr. Packhauser took an interest in Anneliese's seizures and wrote to her primary physician, Dr. Vogt, recommending she meet with a neurologist. And he called Anneliese's seizures apoplectic, which means she had sudden bleeding or loss of blood flow to her brain. Or in other words, she may have suffered a stroke. Except this wasn't true, and Dr. Vogt did not refer Anneliese to a neurologist, and instead prescribed Dilantin, an anti-seizure medication. Anneliese did not take the medication for very long, and she struggled to focus and fell into deeper bouts of depression. Speaking to Dr. Dietrich Lenner, Anneliese reported, quote, "In my last 2 years of school, 1970 to 71 and 1972 to 73, I was indifferent to everything. My condition was getting worse and worse. During those years, I became completely apathetic and nothing interested me." End quote. In June 1972, during her final year of high school, Anneliese suffered another seizure. As summer turned to fall, she tried to assuage her mother's concerns, but with little success. Anneliese Michel suggested they contact Dr. Luthi, and on September 5, 1972, they traveled to Aschaffenburg, where Anneliese confided that she was having additional seizures. But like before, the examinations did not reveal any abnormalities. Still, Dr. Luthi prescribed Zentropil, an anticonvulsant, and recommended that she see him regularly. On November 8, 1972, Anneliese had another seizure, though it is believed this one passed as quickly as it arrived. In the first half of 1973, Anneliese visited Dr. Luthi at least 4 times: January 18th, March 17th, June 4th, and June 6th. And despite the stress of exams and her upcoming graduation, Anneliese did not report having a seizure during that time. And for the first time in several years, it appeared as if things might be starting to take a turn for the better. Except, perception may not have been reality. Because what Dr. Luthi did not know, because Anneliese didn't tell him, was that a few weeks after she began taking Zentropil, sometime in October 1972, her seizures began to multiply. And not only that, Anneliese began, quote, "to smell in unpleasant odors that others did not smell, and the terrible devilish faces now appeared more and more frequently in her field of vision, even in large numbers." End quote. The strange smell was described as fecal matter, and the demonic faces tormented her, so much so that she became increasingly convinced that the devil was inside her. And no matter how hard she tried, or the treatment she received, Anneliese could not get the images out of her mind. And this was just the beginning. We'll continue right after this quick ad break. In the spring of 1973, Anneliese reported hearing strange knocking sounds in her bedroom. Her mother pushed back and eventually took Anneliese to an ear specialist, who, much like the doctors before, could not find anything wrong with her. Back at home, the scary noises continued, rapping and knocking sounds throughout the room. And for the first time, her sisters claimed to have heard the noises as well. Felicitas Goodman details this revelation. Quote, "It's not just Anneliese who hears it. Anneliese was just the first to hear it. Then others noticed it too. There was a loud noise, as if a chair had fallen over. Then something started knocking. In the closet, beneath the floor, above the ceiling." End quote. Now she could no longer keep her secret, and finally told her parents about the demonic faces and the voices that told her she was damned to hell forever. Joseph tried to reassure Anna that Anneliese was suffering from epilepsy and that with medication and treatment, she would get better just fine. But Anna pushed back and detailed an incident where, quote, she had witnessed Anneliese standing before their statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary, with her face full of hatred and her eyes jet black. End quote. Felicitas Goodman offers more detail on this strange occurrence. Quote, "You know that statue of the Virgin Mary on the mantelpiece downstairs? Well, a few days ago, I was walking through the living room, completely by accident, and there was Anneliese, staring at the statue. She was standing completely still, and she was looking at it with hatred. Her face looked like a horrible mask. It was all contorted, and her eyes were completely black. And her hands, you know how delicate her hands are. Her hands had claws, like they were paws, very thick. It was horrible, I tell you. I was so scared. I ran out of the room, rushed into the office, and tried to calm down and started writing out bills. But I couldn't write at all. My hands were shaking." End quote. For Joseph Michel, clinging to their faith was the best solution. But as Anneliese's torment increased, family prayer and the rosary seemed less effective. In April 1973, Anneliese was diagnosed with measles. Yet despite her illness, she passed the Abitur exams and graduated. But what should have been a time of celebration was anything but. In a recorded interview with Father Renz, Anneliese described how she was feeling at that time. Quote, "It was especially gruesome at the time of the Abitur. Oh, Herr Pater, you cannot imagine that most awful dread. It is a terror which goes through all my limbs and settles there. It is a dread that makes you think you are right there, in the middle of hell. You are totally, utterly deserted. You can call all you want for help, to the Mother of God maybe, but they are all deaf. I think that is how it must have been for our Savior on the Mount of Olives, where they say he was beset by the shudders of death. Although I think for him it must have been worse, for after all, he had taken all the sins of the people on himself, all the sins of the world." End quote. As the summer of 1973 turned to fall, Anneliese fell deeper into depression and apathy. Her father came up with an idea, a pilgrimage to San Damiano, Italy. Initially, Anneliese was uncaring, but her father gave her a small book, Our Lady of San Damiano, which persuaded Anneliese to take the pilgrimage. By the time they departed, she was hopeful to pray the rosary in this special place, and perhaps feel the presence of the Mother of God once again, maybe like when she was in Middelburg. Here is a record of Anneliese's experience at San Damiano. Quote, "San Damiano is a small town in northern Italy, at the foot of the Apennines. Mama Rosa's house is a little away from the village. It is a farmer's house. Behind it are large vineyards, where tall Italian vines with shiny red grapes have been pruned of their leaves. There is a path next to the house. In front, about 4 meters from the entrance, stands a life-size statue of Padre Pio. Through the windows on the left, you can see the rooms where Mama Rosa lives with her loved ones. There is another window through which you can see the chapel, decorated by the household. Inside, there is a painting of Christ. When you walk past this house, which is about 12 meters wide, you can see a garden bordering the back wall, surrounded by a tall, beautifully carved fence. Behind it is a statue of Mary, and just in front of it is a wooden cross. Further on, you can see a spring and a pear tree, which is said to be a place of apparitions. There is an open space around the garden. Part of this square is covered with green plastic sheeting to protect people from the harsh rays of the sun. During the day, pilgrims come there to pray in silence. As for Anneliese, she told me, and Mrs. Hine confirmed, that she could not enter this holy place. She was as if spellbound and approached it with great reluctance. The ground burned her like fire, and she could not bear it. She made a wide detour around the place of apparitions and entered from the other side, not through the main entrance. She saw people praying there, and said that they prayed as if they were baring their teeth. She kept trying to get closer, and several times she managed to reach the edge of the garden, but each time she couldn't stand it any longer. She had to look away from the image of Christ. She also said that she couldn't look at the medals and pictures of saints at all because they shone so brightly that she couldn't bear it." End quote. Others in the pilgrimage group noticed Anneliese's odd behaviors and talked amongst themselves, with at least one person suggesting, quote, "The devil may be involved here." End quote. Additional reporting about Anneliese's behavior is as follows. Quote, "It also should be mentioned that on the way back, Anneliese behaved inappropriately towards Mrs. Hine. She spoke in a deep voice, mocked Mrs. Hine, but she was also full of anxiety. She was no longer the same Anneliese. She ripped the medal from Mrs. Hine's neck and spread a terrible stench around her. Mrs. Hine said she had never smelled anything like it before. It smelled like feces, burning, everything possible. Everyone smelled it. They were also a little angry, as I learned from Mrs. Hine that the girl was behaving this way, talking loudly, etc. So it was completely inappropriate behavior. Her father sat down next to her, and then people began to understand that something peculiar was happening to Anneliese." End quote. After returning from San Damiano, Anneliese became ill, and as the weeks passed, Anna reminded her she needed to enroll at the teacher's college. But Anneliese, struggling with her health and depression, pushed back and insisted that she could not go to school. Anna suggested another appointment with Dr. Luthi, with the hope that he might prescribe something that would allow her to focus on her studies. Anneliese agreed, and on September 3, 1973, they traveled to Aschaffenburg, and for the first time, she told Dr. Luthi what she was dealing with, stating, quote, "I often see devilish faces. The devil is inside me. Everything inside me is empty." End quote. She also claimed judgment was going to be visited upon the world in fire. There's something interesting and important to note here. At this point, Anneliese believed she was being tormented by Satan, not that she was possessed. When you first hear it, it may seem like a minor distinction, nothing more than semantics. But the differences are in fact notable, and we'll explore this in greater detail in episode 3. And in the aftermath of Anneliese's tragic death, questions were raised about her statements to Dr. Luthi and his recommendations. We'll explore this in greater detail in episodes 5 through 7. It is believed that Dr. Luthi made a passing comment, possibly in jest, that Anneliese should see a Jesuit priest if she was seeing the devil. Though he attached little significance to it when she told him, Dr. Luthi, quote, "added aolep drops to the anticonvulsant medication, a drug usually prescribed for neurotic developmental disorders in children and adolescents." End quote. His intention was to help Anneliese, quote-unquote, calm down, though this would be the last time she saw Dr. Luthi. From that point on, she saw specialists in Würzburg, and she never again told a medical professional about the demonic faces that haunted her, or made claims about the impending doom and judgment of the world. In the short time leading to her departure for the Teachers' College, Anneliese continued to struggle with depression and an overwhelming tiredness. She told her mother that the medication and drops prescribed by Dr. Luthi were not working and may have been making her symptoms worse, because she continued to see the horrible faces day and night. Anna suggested Anneliese meet with a priest. Thea Hein, the tour guide at San Damiano who had since become a family friend, suggested the family meet with Father Ferdinand Habinger from the parish of Our Lady in Aschaffenburg. The Michels corresponded with him, and within a few weeks, they met with him at the church rectory. He recounted his initial meeting with the family. Quote, "One summer day in 1973, I can't remember the exact date today, Mr. and Mrs. Michel from Klingenberg came to the rectory with Anneliese to ask me for advice. I think they were referred to me by Mrs. Hein from Ebersbach. The Michels told me in a short conversation that their daughter Anneliese had been experiencing symptoms for some time that could indicate possession. They told me, among other things, that their daughter had broken her rosary during a pilgrimage to San Damiano. I also spoke with Miss Michel at that time, and had the impression that she was actually a completely normal girl, behaving a little timidly and reservedly during the conversation. I could not recognize any signs of possession. At the end of the conversation, I advised the Michels to see a specialist and have their daughter examined." End quote. Father Habinger's assessment of Anneliese is fascinating, because by the time the Michels met with him, they believed Anneliese might be showing signs of demonic possession. Yet, when he assessed her, he did not see any external evidence to suggest this, and instead recommended she be taken to a specialist, which had already proven largely unfruitful. It was a suggestion Anneliese did not take well, and she was steadfast in her refusal to meet with another doctor. Thea Hein had another possible solution: meet with Father Adolf Rodewyk, a Jesuit priest, who was, quote, "a well-known expert who had written many books on possession." End quote. We'll find out what happens right after this quick ad break.
As a contractor, I don't pay for materials I don't use. So why would I pay for stuff I don't need in my mobile plan? That's why my Biz plan from Verizon Business is so perfect. Now I can choose exactly what I want, and I only pay for what I need.
Right now, with my Biz plan, get our best price, as low as $25 a line. Visit verizon.com/business to get started today. New lines only. Price per month with 5+ lines. Includes auto pay and paper-free billing and promotional discounts. Taxes, fees, economic adjustment charge. Applicable add-ons, prices, and terms apply. Guarantee applies to base monthly rate and stated discounts only. Add-on prices additional. Offers in March 31st, 2026.
Ahead of the meeting, Thea Hein informed Dr. Rodewyk about Anneliese's experience at San Damiano, and upon receiving the letter, stated, quote, "After receiving the letter from Mrs. Hein, I replied that, based on what she had written in the letter, I did indeed find external signs of the girl's possession. But due to the great distance between Frankfurt and Klingenberg, and my age, born in 1894, I could not take on the case." End quote. Father Rodewyk recommended Anneliese meet with Father Herman, a retired priest who may have had more time to meet with her. And the two did meet, nearly a dozen times over 2 years. And Father Herman noted Anneliese, quote, "to be a nice young lady who was obviously from a deeply religious home." End quote. Anneliese told Father Herman about the demonic faces, though she struggled to describe them in detail, leading Father Herman to suggest she meet with a neurologist. Anneliese explained that she had been seeing Dr. Luthi, but his treatments were largely unsuccessful. And Father Herman learned something else. Quote, "I learned from her parents that Anneliese would periodically and violently reject consecrated objects in her home. In addition, she spread the stench of burning and manure around the rooms where she stayed. During these conversations in my apartment, These symptoms did not occur, even though I often prayed the rosary with her. She behaved calmly and devoutly and showed no signs of eccentricity." End quote. At this point, the story shifts significantly, with two other priests, Father Roth and Father Ernst Alt, becoming involved. One evening, Father Roth visited Father Alt and told him of Anneliese Michel, who they had not met at the time. Father Alt was informed that some believed Anneliese was possessed, or at the very least, tormented by the devil, and that it was his job to determine whether or not that was true. What happened next is best understood in Father Alt's own words. Quote, "I was able to suddenly describe the whole family: father, mother, siblings, grandmother. I couldn't have known this because I had never seen this family before. I could also tell that Anneliese's neck, possibly her thyroid gland and head, radiated extremely strongly. Nothing that could explain this came to mind. Of course, it was not yet possible to draw any conclusions about possible possession from this. 2 days later, I visited Father Herman, who was familiar with the case. He handed me 2 letters, one from the mother and the other from Michel's daughter. I did not read the letters. I suddenly felt sick and thought I was about to faint. I fell into a strange state of agitation, unknown to me until then, and all this happened to the horror and amazement of Father Herman, who was present. But on this basis, it was still not possible to prove possession. In the evening, during Holy Mass, when I was mentally preparing for the moment of the Holy Transubstantiation, and included this girl, whom I did not yet know, in the sacrifice, I felt as if I had been struck in the back. A cold breeze enveloped the back of my head. At the same moment, I smelled an intense burning odor. I had to lean against the altar. With great difficulty and concentration, I said the words of the consecration and the rest of the canon. I found myself in a difficult situation, dazed. I felt as if I were surrounded by some negative force, which, however, apart from tormenting me, could do nothing to me. After Mass, I immediately went to Father Herman, to whom I calmly and in detail recounted everything. The following night was the most restless night of my life. Even though I took a strong sleeping pill, which usually always helped, I could not calm down. My apartment was filled with the ever-changing stench of burning, manure, sewage, and feces. When I reached for my rosary, when I said other prayers, it stank in the truest sense of the word, like hell. On top of that, there was a loud knocking coming from my closet several times. I lay in bed in great agony and tried to pray. I remembered my priestly authority. I performed an exorcism in my own words. For a few moments, I felt better. My body was ice cold, but drenched in sweat. In my agony, I called on Padre Pio, whom I knew had experienced similar things. But nothing happened. I repeated my call, and suddenly my room was filled with the intense scent of violets. At first, I thought it might be the scent of aftershave on my pajamas, but my pajamas were soaked in sweat. Strangely, the sweating suddenly stopped, and my body began to warm up. I breathed a sigh of relief and only then realized that until then, I had had a narrowed field of vision and reduced color perception. Now I could see colors with normal intensity once again. The pressure in my head had completely disappeared. I slept peacefully and relaxed for another hour until I had to get up. My night lasted from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. When I told my fellow priests about it the next evening, they suddenly smelled the same characteristic stench. The whole rectory smelled of burning, even though all the windows were wide open." End quote. Father Alt reported experiencing these strange occurrences several other times, though when he prayed, they stopped almost immediately. Then, he finally met Anneliese in person and described her as depressed, though able to communicate very well verbally. He believed demonic possession was possible, though wanted to be certain before confirming it. Something interesting. Anneliese's struggles continued after meeting Father Auld, but she believed that he was helping her. Then one day, while the two were talking, quote, he suddenly noticed that her face had changed, her eyes had darkened, and she was unresponsive. At the same time, he saw a shadow appear behind her. He asked, "What's going on, Anneliese?" "I'm back tormented," she replied. He gave her his priestly blessing, and everything returned to normal. That was great. Anneliese beamed. Soon after, Anneliese registered for school, majoring in education and theology. And despite the seeming upturn in her circumstances, the situation was going to get worse. Much, much worse. I'll confess, this case truly baffles me, because Anneliese's family was doing everything in their power to find treatment and relief. And despite their best efforts, they were left with more questions than answers. Recently, I was asked if I believed in demonic possession, or if I thought there was some other explanation. And my answer was, I'm not sure. It's a fact of life that we often search for neat and tidy solutions to problems. There's catharsis in recognizing and understanding a problem, and developing and implementing a treatment approach. Except, as we can see, Anneliese's case is neither neat nor tidy. There are no simple answers, and no matter how much her symptoms resemble epilepsy, the test results show no abnormalities. And that leaves us with an incredibly uncomfortable question. If medical science, with all its advancements and technology, was unable to find the cause of her suffering, is it possible that Anneliese Michel was in the beginning stages of demonic possession? The answer, either way, will have profound implications moving forward. And in order to answer the question legitimately, we first have to understand what demonic possession actually is. And that's what we're going to do in next week's episode, so be sure to follow and stay tuned. I'm your host, Will. I'll see you next time as we continue our exploration of the Possession Files, the trials of Anneliese Michel.